Tongkoe Tamboese. At the beginning of the last century, nearly the whole of Sumatra was in uproar. Mohammedan pilgrims are returned from Mecca, preaching the several religion of the Wahhabites, as the sect wanted to purge the religion of Muhammad in Arabia from many faults that had slipped in. The pilgrims in Sumatra also thought it their duty to establish purification of the dogma. This caused much fighting and bloodshed. Full of their divine vocation, they tried to introduce the Reformation with force and violence. Great was the support they obtained immediately, while daily new adherents joined. However, greater was the number who, averse to anything new, stuck to the old adat and would sacrifice everything for its preservation. The friction between two such opposite powers ignited the flame of war, and nearly the whole of the beautiful island became a prey to the wild passions in which the population indulged. Near the confluence of the river Sosa and Siutam was the beginning of 19th century, a century of a large village called Tamboese or Dalu Dalu, the capital of Ranto Binuang, bordering upon Sosa. It was the most important place in the district, and its chiefs considered themselves descendants from Sultan Iskandar Zulkarnain, or the 201, the Indian name for the Indian name for Alexander the Great. Ranto Binuang was a prosperous district because of its trade in wood products, which were brought by Chinese and Buginese transported to commercial towns like Malacca, Johor, and Rio. On account of this trade and this transit trade of the uplands, Dalu had become the most lively place of that part of Middle Sumatra to the last intercourse with other nations. Many had undertaken the pilgrimage to Mecca since the beginning of the 17th century. Ranto Binuang had been an Islamic island, Islamic land. Among the pilgrims were also Imam Maulana Kadli and his son Haji Muhammad Saleh, the latter on so notorious Tongkoe Tamboese, also called Balayo. About 1820 until 1825, they must have returned from Mecca and have settled in Dalu Dalu. They too had been present during the war of the Wahhabites for the purification of Muhammad, for the purification of Muhammad's religion. Altogether, under the influence of that Reformation, Imam Maulana Qadri opened a school. His reputation of being a deeply religious man, as well as his great zeal for the Mohammedan faith, soon gathered around him many pupils. The conversions were quietly carried out, but Imam Maulana died and his son, who succeeded him as leader in prayer and the new dogma, did not possess his father's passion. He insisted that the young Dipertuan of Ranto Binuang should follow the regulations laid down by the Mohammedan religion and should force his subjects to adopt the new dogma. This man, this this man, this man was, however, not to be persuaded to do this, but Haji Muhammad Salih obtained in the meanwhile a great many followers, and the young Dipertuan, fearing that his authority should be suppressed, chased the Haji out of Tamboese. Being the weaker, the Haji traveled round to gain satellites. Only he was sure that his dogma would find supporters among the foremost people. Did eventually live back in Tamboese. The young Dipertuan dared not to use did not use violence against him, but when they began to take recourse to the butchery, and it became evident that the fanatics would not spare his person, the young Dipertuan left his capital and settled in Tanah Putih. This flight gave a free hand to the zealots in Tamboese. From a peaceful purpose, it became a religious strife, and when also the news of the many cultists that fanatics had committed and still committed in the Padang Uplands was known, a civil war was ensued between the adherents of the purification dogma and the others, which only ended after the conversion of the immigration to Tanah Putih. They were saved there from further persecution. The only means of communication was the river, and it was not likely that the war would be continued there with so little chance of flight if the issue should be unfavorable. It was of course not theatre that the parties, or Orang Putih as they called themselves, for their weight of clothing consisting of a white sheet and a white turban, directed their view to find new food for their soul. So proud of their victory gained over the adversaries, they had become even more eager to continue the work of conversion as well. Now, it did not only concern the Mohammedans that were of another opinion, but also the heathens, a much wider task, namely the spreading of Islam. All those that were not converted to this belief were infidels, or whom the great prophet had said that it was right to fly against them, whom he commanded to kill wherever they might be unless they sought repentance, and whom he ordered to extirpate, that God should reward those that fight for the true faith. Crowds of bloodthirsty people went round through the district situated in the Lubu River. They forced the population to adopt their faith if they did not prefer that. From there they went to the district of the Siutam and Sosa rivers. Here it was the heathens that were to be extirpated, and the Bataks, not used to hard fighting, were soon subdued. They offered the submission, but when the condition was met that they should adopt the Islam, and those who refused because they did not understand it were ruthlessly murdered. They fled into the forests and districts away from their country. The chiefs of Sosa were converted and so maintained in their dignity. This conversion was only in name, for no sooner the savage hordes were out of the country that the just converted Sosa chiefs abjured the new faith, gathered their subjects, made peace with the neighboring chiefs of Ulu Bagumun, and murdered the patriarchs that had stayed behind. Tongkoe Tamboese, Tongkoe Tamboese meanwhile had gone to the Sumpu territory, so it was possible that this murder was not immediately avenged. In Rao, Tongkoe Tamboese had joined the fanatic general known by the title of Tuanku Rao, a person a person who had arrogantly taken possession of the title Yang di Pertuan. By the joint forces Mandeling was conquered. The news of the murder in Sosa reached them there. Across the mountains between Little Mandeling and Ulu Barumun, Tongkoe Tamboese marched to Sosa to take his revenge. Not prepared for this arrival, the population of Ulu Barumun had taken to flight, greatly alarmed, so that only Sosa could offer resistance. After a short fight, the population had to flee also. Only two strongly populated villages offered resistance. Only when they had been set fire, did the defendants surrender. A dreadful carnage is said to have been made so that the chiefs of Sosa in future never had the courage to take themselves away from Padres. On the contrary, later on, they even became their most faithful allies. A long time, Tongkoe Tamboese remained in Ulubarumon when he succeeded in gaining the confidence of the chiefs that had fled out and the population so that they returned to their dwelling places. Islam was adopted and all the subdued chiefs of confederacies obtained the title of Gadli. Whereas Tuan Kurau stretched his conquests as far as the Toba lands and committed everywhere the most violent cruelties. Most of the districts of Padang Lawas and Ulubarumon fell without strife into the hands of Tongkoe Tamboese. Almost everywhere, the chiefs strove to obtain the title of Kadri. Those who would not become Padris sought refuge in Dolok. If the chiefs in plain were prepared to join the army of the Padris and cast in the lot with them, it was not so. It was not so the case with those in the mountains. Repeatedly, they undertook raids in the plains and robbed people whom they ate in the mountains or made their slaves. Tongkoe Tamboese decided to put a stop to this and marched up against Siminabun with his fanatic troops. Datu Bangi, Raja of Siminabun, have left his village for fear of an attack of the Padris and built himself a fortress on the Dolok Siminabun, a steep rock on the right bank of the Panay, and so to say the key to the Dolok on that side. The rock was so impregnable that he could remain there during a year while the Padres were in camp all around. He succeeded in causing them great losses from this favorable situation. The Padres would perhaps never have got possession of the fortress if Treason had not delivered it into their hands. A brother of Datubangi showed them the way to climb the rock. When Datubangi discovered the treason, he surrendered on the condition that the lives of his people should be spared. But no sooner had the Padres reached the rock than the wholesale butchery was committed. Old people and children were pitilessly mutilated and murdered. Before the eyes of their wives and mothers, the men were slain and then thrown over the precipice, but not before they had witnessed how their wives and daughters were raped. The latter were bound afterwards and taken away as slaves and divided among the chiefs. Tongkoe Tamboese took possession of the maidens and made them his concubines in order to sell them later on for arms, powder, and lead. Every young maiden was worth a barrel of gunpowder. Datubangi, his wife, his brother, and a few followers succeeded to escape. Across the most impassable mountains, they sought a shelter in the dark fortress of the Barisan Mountains and joined the population of the territory of the Sirumambe and Aikilum, who had gone to the almost unapproachable top of the Dolok Sogdak. But as far as here, they were pursued by the Padres who attempted in vain to reach the summit. After this butchery, Tongkoe Tamboese marched against Huraba, a fortress near the Tabola. Various villages had fortified themselves there, who had put themselves under the command of Tulan di Gajah. He defended the fortress as long as he could. He could, however, not hold against the joint army of the Padres and Padang Lawasians and fled with his soldiers to the top of steep sandstone rock, which could only be reached on one side by a narrow mountain dam, and others were surrounded by dead ravens. They, there, they, there, they were left alone by the padres, who marched as far as the right bank of the Brill River. This expedition was very successful, for the population, afraid of experiencing the same fate as Siminabuns, has fled in the wood and to the tops of the mountains. Only a few villages remained in the plain, but were soon subjugated. Furthermore, Tongkoe Tamboese did not go. His forces had remarkably decreased. The great losses before Siminabun, the Tang expeditions to the difficult mountains country of Dolok, where many lost their lives or had to stay behind. The spot increased through newly converted heathens, the small booty prisoners of war, goods and provisions, had caused the Padres zeal to listen. Many separated themselves from Tongkoe Tamboese, so that the bandar he could hardly dispose at 100 fighting men. Therefore, he went back to Ulubarumon. He did not remain there very long. Tuanku Rao called him to Rao and Mandeling, where the population had rid themselves of the party and offered their submission to the Netherlands government. It was of great importance for Tongkoe Tamboese to prevent the Dutch from marching, and with a large army he went to Rau. He arrived only, however, to see this district in the hands of the Dutch, who had built the fort of Amerongen near Padang Matinggi and had ensconced themselves there. This happened in October 1832. The Dutch tried to get him on their side, but he asked such a high price that they could not deal with him. He did not leave Go, remained in the village of Padang Matinggi and took from there an active part in the attacks on Fort Amerongen. In one of these attacks in January 1833, he was wounded. However, faithful the Padang Lawasian had remained to him while he was amongst them. His long absence had weakened their zeal. As it happened, a certain Jabuaton, a native of Mandeling, had arrived at Hayuara and had persuaded the chiefs and the population to drive the Padres out of the plains. He had dreamed that he was the elected of heaven to protect the half-murdered village of Hayuara from the Green Bandar. He looked upon this nocturnal vision as a sacred mission, left Mandaling and arrived Lon and unknown in Bagumon. There he revealed his dream to the remaining population of Hayuara and Batang Moar and was accepted with confidence as leader in the battle. The youth succeeded so well in making himself worthy of this confidence, make the enemy shrink back so often covered with blood, and provided so efficiently for the defense of Hayuara that both tribes did homage to him as to a person anointed by deity and proclaimed him Sultan Hayuara. A few hundred combatants descended the mountains of Hayuara and fell into Hasahatan. Soon Ulubarumon was rid of the Padris and the whole of Padang Lawas rose against the chiefs appointed by Tongkoe Tamboese, who in a part abjured Islam and adopted again their heathenish customs. However, Tongkoe Tamboese, suffering from his wounds, received a draw march up to Padang Lawas. It was little trouble to him to subdue again the whole plain. They were so afraid of him that his appearance alone was enough to restore his authority. Many of the disloyal ships emigrated, however, to the territory downstream for fear of revenge. Only Hajiwara did not submit. Tongkoe Tamboese then marched thither with the chiefs of Ulubarumon that had submitted again to him, but met with such a fixed reception that only a hurried flight saved him. This rated crowned Jar Buraton's work, who thereupon was elected principal chief. Tongkoe Tamboese tried once again to subdue Hayuwara, but when he did not succeed, he marched to Sosopan and Batang Onang when the chiefs and population had turned heathen again. At the news of this arrival, however, they had fled to the forest and Angola. The village of Tabat alone remained inhabited and offered resistance for a long time, but the village was burned down and only the Raja and few of his followers escaped. Those who fell into the those who fell into the Padri's hands were cruelly murdered. The women were taken and sold as slaves. So once again, the whole plain and the valley of Batang Unang were in the possession of Tongkoe Tamboese. He commanded the chiefs of Padang Lawas to try again to wage war against the mountain inhabitants. He himself went to Angola and Mandeling, but the chiefs who had received this command thought twice before assaulting the inhabitants in their own country. The most fanatic chiefs objected to being a battle where their lives would be at stake against their customs, and they were certain that the mountain dwellers would not submit without offering a violent resistance. The defense of Siminabun was still fresh in their minds and had made them experience sufficiently that they were not powerful enough to take possession of the fortress so firmly built by NATO. However, the absence of Tongkoe Tamboese did not give peace back to these districts. The strife among the chiefs in the plain was the cause of it. From that moment, many wars waged until 1879 in this river basin. They had got to know the value of money. Through money, one could obtain power. People were sold and the money was used to make more slaves and to enlarge their appearance. The chiefs of Kota Pinang, Bila and Panay were the buyers of the many people captured in the war who, without discrimination, were made slaves, while the chiefs of the lower river basin got rid of those slaves at a large profit to dealers in Pulu, Penang, and Malacca. And when Tongkoe Tamboese, after a 3 years absence, returned to these districts, he found very powerful chiefs but large parts of the country quite without population. His arrival seems to have restored rest to the country so that the population returned to the villages. It seems that Tongkoe Tamboese had a presentiment that the end of the path he had led had come, and that he, by leading a peaceful life, tried to make this end tried to make this end less fatal, and thought to have felt his fate altogether. More and more he withdrew, surrendered his power, so to say, to the Padang Lawas chiefs, and led the life of a priest. He had not foreseen, however, that the seed scattered by him would not germinate so abundantly, that although he was no longer on the head of these bloodthirsty fanatics, all these cruelties were committed in his name. The Dutch troops that had forced him to leave Gaul for good in 1835 and made it impossible to surprise the fortress at Kotanopan during the New Year's celebration of that year forced him also, in the latter part of 1836, to leave his post at Mapatungul, as the district in fact had offered its admission to the government. His influence there, which had been so great, was entirely broken. Yet he had tried by an alliance with Tuanku Imam of Bonjol to remain himself in a mountain pass between Tunggal and the Kamparlands. Interference of the population, powerlessness of Tuanku Imam, who was who was in his waters of Bonjol, and want of and want of and want of provisions forced him to leave that place and return to Tamboese in August 1836, chased by the Dutch troops. Like a wild beast, the population of those districts was solely before he had ruled the unlimited power, chased him out of the districts, and so he was shot at in Rokan, where he had died. With only a handful of adherents, he arrived at Tamboese. He suspected that the Dutch troops would not leave him in peace, for immediately after return he fortified Dalu still more and had many small kubus fortified encampments built around it. He did not meddle with it himself, but departed to Padang Lawas, the only district that had remained loyal to him. For for a long time already, Banding and Uncle had asked the government of the Dutch in this for protection. In 1837, they again repeated the request. When when Bonjol had fallen on August 16th of that same year, the governor of Sumatra's west coast made up his mind to satisfy the request and to pursue the parties further. He commanded Major van Beethoven to drive Tongkoe Tamboese back within the borders of his territory. In November 1837, he marched up to Batang Unang, where the population joined his troops. Here, a small garrison were left behind. The expedition went on to Portibi. When Tongkoe Tamboese had been in the past, the Dutch encamped on the edge of the plateau from which the valley in which Portibi is situated could be overlooked. Though living in discord, Hajoran and Siminabun allied themselves with them. The village was strongly fortified and was defended stubbornly. When the troops, however, had encamped on the other side of the Pane River, just opposite the open part of the village, resistance was no longer possible. The population fled and left the fortress in Dutch hands without defending themselves. Many other villages submitted. Within a short time, the plain of Padang Lawas was subdued and Tongkoe Tamboese driven away. He went to Dalu Dalu and fortified the village more and more. Near Mondang, he and the enemy met. After a short struggle, he had to fly in great haste. Repeatedly, however, he undertook raids and he even succeeded in surprising an outpost from which he was driven away soon. From the beginning of 1835 until December of that year, the Dutch troops were occupied in taking the many entrenchments put up round Dalu Dalu. Every further march was contested by the enemy, and consequently many skirmishes took place with many losses. After fresh troops had arrived, the attack was planned. The fortress stormed and take on December 28, 1838. For Tongkoe Tamboese, they looked in vain. It was said that at the last assault he had fled on the proa. They never heard of him again, so that it is supposed he died during his escape. Authors maintain that he fled to Malacca and died there. There is no reason for accepting this as the truth. Tongkoe Tamboese is said to have had a kind nature, rather indulgent than severe. It cannot have been his intention to accept a general strife for the belief of Muhammad. It was originally it was only his aim to improve in his country that which weakened the true faith. In Mecca, he had learned to know improvements and vanity as well as agreement with the dogma of the Wahhabites made him wish that this religion should also be preached in his own country, that he did not choose the best means to reach his purpose, namely by calmly preaching as his father had done, and trying to increase the number of followers by leading a good life himself. How was this to be expected for a young man with a tropical temperament? And yet, if he had wanted to act differently, the time in which he lived would have made it impossible. Repeatedly, news came from the Padang uplands. They heard how the party sex spread there, how the means used there were always successful. If Tongkoe Tamboese wanted to check the stream that he had set flowing himself, he could not have succeeded. Should have his influence been so great, he would have signed his own death sentence. He would have been accused of indifference, and soon some fanatic would have murdered him. In this way, he was dragged along to save his own life in that fierce war which had begun in the west some years before. It must be ascribed to him however, that the brothers in the north, at the beginning of the war at least, did not commit some cruelties as they committed in the south. Not before Tongkoe Tamboese allied himself with Tuan Kurau, we atrocities done, which can only be equal to those of the British India revolt in the middle of the last century. Old men were ruthlessly murdered, children slaughtered before their parents' eyes, old women had their breasts cut off, and were then killed, young men fell into the hands of their commanders, who, after satisfying their sensual pleasure, sold them as slaves. Young maidens were taken as concubines or sold to the highest bidders. Men that were able to bear arms had to join those bloodthirsty hordes after they had been converted. If they proposed anything, they were tortured, made slaves, or killed. The ritual prayers had to be rigorously observed. Those who omitted to say them were treated as kafir, and only by paying a high fine they could escape death. They, they were no longer allowed to eat siri, and their teeth had to be filled. Cook fights were forbidden. All those who sinned against these rules had to pay a big fine or were made slaves. Tongkoe Tamboese himself had never made himself guilty of those atrocities. It is true that he profited by them in the form of fines and slaves, but those who also served to combat the heavy expenses of the war. Tongkoe Tamboese should not have been a commander. He should never have led the operations of a siege of campaign. Everything was left to the moment, but he possessed much personal courage. He was fine of stature, which saw all the better in his short doublet with brass knots. A turban of wrap was his headgear. The natives, whose general attached much value to outward appearances, saw in him something divine. If he had withdrawn in time, which would have been possible after the expedition in the dialogue had failed, he might have lived in their memory as a holy man, and they would have made offerings at his tomb, but seduced and misled on account of the great power which he had obtained, unbalanced by the respect they showed him, carried away by the homage offered him, and last not least flattered in his vanity by the fear which they had for him. He took pleasure in the part he played, and yet, in spite of everything, there is something in the character of Tongkoe Tamboese that asks for our respect. He was the leader sent by God, the faithful one irradiated by celestial visions, who in his young soul was deeply convinced of a great sacred ideal. Justice and law had to reign on the earth, and the happiness of men should be established forever under the green banner of the prophet. For this ideal, he offered joy, rest, and safety. When it was written in the stars that his hour had come, he drew the sword without hesitating and let loose a war which ravaged the peaceful mountain districts of Sumatra like a tempest. Fortune and misfortune were his share and from his share, but they neither disturbed the simplicity of his character nor the purity of his soul. His mysterious disappearance is quite in harmony with his strange, adventurous life. Deep down in the lonely virginal forest lies the grave of the small, bold insurgent who during his lifetime was perhaps more lonely than in death.